Our guest today is Paul Zed, Chairman, President Advisory Board, Cisco Systems Canada. Welcome to our program.
Thanks, David. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Paul is a businessman, a lawyer, a senior public figure, and an educator. He graduated from Dalhousie University with a BA, a law degree from UMB, and a master's in law from the prestigious London School of Economics. He's also a graduate of the Rotman School of Management on the Institute of Corporate Directors. Mr. Zed served in the Parliament of Canada for 9 years. He represented constituencies in New Brunswick and served as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government. Mr. Zed also chaired the Commons Committee on Industry, Government Operations, and Procedures on House Affairs. Our guest authored one of the first major pieces of Canadian legislation on lobbying and government ethics. He was a senior corporate and commercial lawyer and a law professor for several years and has been a member of the New Brunswick and Canadian Bar since 1982. He's the chairman, as I said in the introduction, of the President's Advisory Board at Cisco Systems Canada since December of 2009. Mr. Zed co-led the establishment and transformation of the largest technology investment in Canada's history at Cisco. This investment of $4 billion created 1,700 jobs in Ontario and will enable Cisco to launch a state-of-the-art, world-class innovation center. Cisco recently announced $150 million for the Cisco Canada Innovation Program for venture capital startups. Under Mr. Zed's leadership, they have established chairs and research professorships through 14 Canadian universities and colleges, totaling over $20 million. Our guest has an enormous commitment to his community. The United Way, the Canadian Cancer Society, Special Olympics Canada, the Lester B. College of the Pacific, the Trudeau Centre for Peace, Conflict and Justice, and the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Indeed, a very, very impressive resume, I might say. First of all, I guess I'm quite interested in trying to understand Cisco's major role in Canada with this $4 billion investment fund. Could you just elaborate on that?
Well, I think, thanks very much for your kind introduction, first of all, and it's always a pleasure to see you and see the great work that's being done with this project that you've launched through the university. I think that it's this kind of endeavor that talks about our young innovation and new people understanding, young people, young Canadians understanding the importance of investment. But it isn't just investment by money, it's investment with your time and into Canada's innovation. And what we have found is that the innovation trajectory of the country is starting to lag, and the private sector needs to step up. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So with Cisco, yes, we're a multinational US-based corporation, but like most Canadians, we saw this wonderful company called Nortel in the Canadian technology space, in the networking space. And most of the young engineers and designers, that was their aspiration, was to be in the Nortel world. With the collapse of Nortel, Cisco decided that while they were a fierce competitor of Nortel, that they would make themselves as a company much more germane within Canada to each unique geography of the country. And we started with a pilot project here in Toronto. Cisco had acquired a company called Extend Media, which was over in the Liberty Village area. And when we acquired that company, the first thing that started to happen is a lot of those jobs started to move offshore into China, as an example. And the question then we asked as Canadians was, well, why were those jobs going to China? Could they not be done here in Canada? So we talked to the then Premier McGuinty government and the Minister Sandra Pupatello. We had a very significant dialogue, conversation about how do we encourage Canada, because of its competitiveness and the gap that occurs with jobs in China and India, those countries were very, very much more competitive, if you will, but not just competitive for labor costs, competitive in every other way. Universities, education, living standards. And so we created a gap that was about $20 or $25 million, and we started a pilot project here in Toronto for 300 jobs. So the province of Ontario, together with Cisco, started that. Our chairman, John Chambers, decided with our president, Nitin Kowali, we wouldn't just have a project for 300. We wanted to create a cluster of learning. And Canada, because of its education and its closeness to the US dollar, closeness to the US market,
there was a fit?
There was a complete fit. So Ontario was the right place for us, and we had a small facility in Canada, just outside of Ottawa, and so all of the stars aligned for us, and we're really excited. The take-up is starting to happen, and Canada is, through Cisco and the partnership with the province of the Wynne government, it's turning out to be a win-win for everyone.
So this investment of $4 billion would be over an extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but we're really investing in people. That's really what the dollar investment is. It's hiring people from every facet of the technology spectrum. So it's not just in networking. People think of Cisco as a switching and routing company, and we sometimes call it the plumbing of the internet. But what effectively happens is we have partners, whether it's the TELUS or the Bell or the Rogers or the Videotrons, who are our resellers. So they resell our switches. And frankly, you'd be surprised, the iPhone uses a Cisco patent, as an example. Your home television or your home internet bring, our communications device, whether it's your BlackBerry and my BlackBerry, or my iPhone and your iPhone, they speak to each other because of Cisco switches or a Cisco network. So we're not a retailer. You don't see us sort of in your home. There's
no big neon sign saying shop at Cisco.
Right. But there may be things that you don't even realize are Cisco. For example, Linksys or a WebEx or Scientific Atlantic are all Cisco companies that we've acquired over the years. So
share with us, if you can. I mean, you're a major worldwide operation. How does Cisco Canada, in terms of negotiating with some of these retailers, whether it's Rogers, whether it's TELUS or Bell or whatever your customers, what are some of the challenges that you would have from a negotiating perspective?
Well, I think one of the challenges always is price and service delivery. Those are the two things that always stand out as some of the challenges, and technical support. So while we'll work with many of our service providers, as an example, that's one aspect of our business, we find that being in a position to negotiate the right price, to be in the right market. So for example, people may think of the TELUS organization as more Vancouver-based, but they are obviously a national company and they sell certain of our products. But it's the best way to describe it is that we love all our children. We work with everyone equally. We're in many ways Switzerland. We sell to everybody, and these service provider organizations, they're out beating the ground, developing the competitive forces. So from our perspective, they negotiate with us price, technical support. They negotiate the ability to be able to deliver their product that they're reselling on our behalf on time, and presuming they have, but theirs is always about their relationships with their customers, and we try to stay out of that. But we have relationships, for example, with every major bank. Sometimes those banks may come to us directly and not through one of our partner organizations. So it's a variety of selling models, but our model principally is to sell through our partners.
So you say price and technical support. Can you elaborate a little bit on the technical support? I
Well-
mean, you've given me a good price. I'm happy with that price, but what other strategic advantage would Cisco bring to me as a potential client?
Well, Cisco's platform of products changes very regularly, and the tech market is changing literally as we speak. There is a new app being developed. Cisco is changing many of the things like software as a service is now becoming much more the dominant technology concept in the market. Now, having said that, they come from a world where the core of the business was switches and routers. Everything now is, you'll hear, is going into the cloud. So really, it's becoming the network of clouds. And how do you connect all of these networks? From a competitive perspective and from a negotiations perspective, we work with some of those partners that are investing in the technology, investing in the brains of young people in Canada, because that's really where these new ideas for changing technology is going to come from. It's coming from these men and women who are out there coming up with new ideas that are changing the dynamic of the technology market. And I can tell you that as a recovering politician and a recovering lawyer, it's mind-boggling for me when I watch the breadth of and the speed of how technology is changing everything that we do. So we might have been selling something yesterday that was state of the art, whereas tomorrow we're moving to the cloud, and there may be something beyond the cloud.
So tell us relationships. How important are they for Cisco?
I would say relationships are everything. You and I know from past lives that the relationship with individuals collectively is what will move people into changing the way we work, we play, we learn, and we live. And what we have found at Cisco, I talked earlier about the collapse of this Canadian company, Nortel. What we found is as we moved the Cisco dial throughout the country, we were finding that some people didn't know Cisco. And so in order to get known, you had to knock on the doors of every major CEO again. The technology information officers, the chief information officers in an organization might know about them, but their CEO didn't. And we felt, and we continue to feel, that business relevance now is being driven by the CEO. And technology, it used to be something that was over here. People didn't think of technology as being necessarily relevant for their business. Now everything is about technology. The knowledge-based industries are upon us. And so relationships, individual relationships become critical. They are actually everything. So negotiating those individual relationships become an important part of everything that happens. Everything will flow as a result of who you know.
What are some of the things that you have to do and have done in terms of getting the relationship going, maintaining that relationship, as well as growing that relationship? What are some of the things that you could share with us?
Well, you know, it's actually as basic as the common civil courtesies of saying hello to people. Now, as you know, I'm from New Brunswick, and where you come to the larger city like Toronto, you get on an elevator and people don't even speak to each other. I've actually, and I'm all about sales, and having been in politics, I learned from you, the master of a lot of this, that it's what I call, and I learned from you, in fact, in your earlier days in politics, I call it the Tim Hortons touch. So you go into a Tim Hortons and it's talking to people, finding out how their day is going, because we're all individuals, we're all people. And so when you get into that elevator and you say hello, I found one of the very first things is people would be kind of thinking, that fellow's a little odd. Why is he saying hello? But so it's those very basic common courtesies of picking up the phone, calling a customer, calling on a customer. I'd like to come over for a coffee. I'd like to talk to you about what our company does. So selling yourself as an individual becomes a critical piece of selling the organization that you are a part of. It's the team. And you talked earlier about co-led or I delivered. It was never about I. There's no I in team. We work together, whether it's in politics or whether it's in business. You always work together because that's the way you achieve success.
But you know, the viewer of this particular program will be a student of Ryerson, the negotiation classes. And I think you're sending quite a message here in terms of relationships. A, they are important. B, you need to work them. And it's not rocket science.
No, in fact, it's not only critical, you will be doomed if you just have the skill of how to negotiate and get a deal without the softer side. It's what is that person going through in the run of their day? Where do they come from? What are the cultural aspects that are relevant to the negotiation that you've undertaken? So for example, when I come to negotiation and I'm sitting in a Toronto boardroom, I immediately wonder, do they have a partner? Do they have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? Do they have a husband or a wife? Have they got kids? Because everybody, do they like Tim Hortons or do they like Starbucks? So you go through almost a psychological profile. There's a checklist that goes on in my head, which was not different when I was in politics, because when you knock at that door and you ask people to support you, you need to have a connection with people. It's a connection with the fact that they have an elderly mother that they're caring for at home. So it's the same principle that applies. Everything is really about people and your interaction and relationship with people.
What would you advise people in terms of what not to do in terms of trying to maintain and strengthen relationships?
Well, I think less is more in the early days of getting to know people. But having said that, I think people still like to have people use their names. They like you to know who you're dealing with. So I know this sounds pretty pedestrian, but you'd be amazed at how often people don't know the name of the person that they're negotiating with. And you use that name. But you don't necessarily want to get into an in-depth conversation about their personal life at the first meeting. So it's just knowing, it's to know, you develop that relationship just almost like one of your friends, because the relationship is a deep relationship depending on the length or the extent of the negotiation. You talked about the $3 or $4 billion investment that Cisco has made. It started with my expression that I've used a lot is the acorn becomes an oak tree. And in this case, the acorn was the first planting of 300 jobs with a modest investment that grew over time into a much more significant investment. The Ontario minister at the time met the chairman of our board, John Chambers, with our president, Nitin Kawali, and all of a sudden there was a synergy. There was a creation, a shared interest of shared experiences. That just doesn't happen overnight. So the advice would be, you need to grow, you need to invest in people, and you invest in those relationships with people, and that, in fact, is what ultimately will be successful for you in any negotiation.
Tell me about the Paul Zed communication style. You're dealing with customers, you're dealing with potential customers, you're dealing with complaints. What's your mode of operation in terms of your communication style? Are you a letter? Are you a text? Are you an email? Do you go visit? Is it a combination? Share with us your style in terms of communication.
Well, I came from the world of practicing law, and I started in my own law business where I hung a shingle out and started before I ended up in a much larger law practice. So my attitude was always every yellow or pink message slip that I got a phone call back. or you went out to see people, you went out to see customers or potential customers. Now, many people will remember that a lot of lawyers think that you shouldn't be out selling, and it was partly the tradition of being
The profession.
the profession, which was, it was unseemly to be out selling your services. So that's the world that I came out of. And now today, when you see, you know, billboards going down the highway saying if you've had a car accident or you have a difficult negotiation, call such and such a number, and you know, so our profession as lawyers has changed fairly dramatically. But my simple rule is you call everybody back. And if you can't call them back, if you have a staff person on your team, you have that person calling back and saying, look, I'm terribly sorry Mr. Dingwall's traveling today. He's unable to take the call. But when I was in public life, as it was your reputation, you call everyone back. You communicate with them in some fashion, whether it's a text or a...
Do you find that that takes place today with a lot of people?
You know, I'm amazed at how that very simple courtesy of just letting people know that you got their email doesn't happen. And what I try to do is I'll say, look, I'm terribly sorry I can't respond. But I have a rule that at the end of a week, there isn't a piece of paper left on my desk that is not responded to in some fashion. So, you know, yeah, I could do it every day, but it sometimes just becomes impossible. So at the end of every week or at the beginning of every week, I reply to every single email or every single unreturned phone call. And I also keep a rolling list on my desk of unreturned calls. So for whatever reason, I just haven't gotten to it, or that person is traveling, or they said, look, would like to hear from you in a week or 2 weeks or 5 weeks. So it's actually diarized on my desk.
So getting back to people.
Pretty simple.
Pretty basic, but pretty important.
But you're great at it, and I think that what we've learned is that your success, whether it's in politics or your success in business, it's just all about your relationship with the individual person. And collectively, if you get enough people happy with the fact that at least you're showing up is 50% of your success.
Is there a difference in terms of negotiating with customers in Canada versus dealing with customers, say, for instance, in the United States? Is the Cisco approach a little bit different in the U.S. as opposed to in Canada?
I think it's more relationship-based here in Canada than people would realize. So our president, Nitin Kawali, has just moved on to Rogers, and he'll become the new president of their commercial operations starting Monday next week. Our new president is coming out of Russia, Bernadette Whiteman. She's actually English, she's British, and the very first thing that struck her was how nice Canadians were, which was quite interesting. And she's worked in the emerging markets, she's worked in the Ukraine, Kakistan, came out of the Middle East. And one of the things that she found that culturally, that was very different than certainly her American relationships and in the emerging markets, is Canada's just pretty basic thing of politeness. She couldn't get over how correct and polite and kind and genuinely interested in the other person that we were as Canadians. So I think that we tend to be a little more careful, a little bit more prudent, a little bit more learned isn't quite the right word, but what I think we do is we're a gentler nation, if you will, than some of our American counterparts.